Hi, I'm Liv, and welcome back to the Book Nook, featuring Gomez, apparently. Hey guys, so for today's video I am wrapping up my Birthday Bestsellers TBR and we'll see how that went. Also keeping half an eye on the cat as he climbs all over everything. So firstly, thank you very much for the reception to the Birthday Bestsellers TBR. Glad to see it didn't go down like a totally damn squib. And also thank you very much for all the birthday wishes. I had a lovely birthday in the end on May the 4th be with you. I went to the zoo. I love a good zoo and I always used to go to the zoos with my dad. My dad was more of a zoo person than mum is. And the last time I went to a zoo was actually with dad. It was my birthday 4 years ago and we went to the same zoo. And when we went, we were lucky enough to see my favourite animal, red pandas. They were out and about and it was amazing. And this time when we went, the red panda was also out and about and he came out and he was like feeding in his little food box, and at one point there was a little robin that came and sort of sat below the little box that the red panda was in and sort of cheeped and flew off. So it felt very much like Dad was saying, there you go, I've chivied the red pandas for your birthday. So I had a lovely day at the zoo. I was told that because I was turning 29 I was too old for another red panda plushie, but I did get a little red panda figurine. It's obviously not going to focus, is it? But I did get a little red panda figurine. And I also got a holographic, you can't see it do its thing, holographic red panda bookmark and a coaster, which is upstairs in the office. And I also got a holographic Wolfie one because, why not? So it's inadvertently turned into a bit of a birthday wrap-up, but it's on theme. Lovely presents of books and Magic the Gathering cards from my family, and my dear friends got me a lovely little like bird watching kit. They got me some binoculars and a bird watching book because my dad was a keen bird watcher, and since he died I've been meaning to kind of get back into it. I used to go like a little bit with him when I was younger, but I found it a little bit boring, but I really want to do some more, and so it was very sweet of them to give me like a little bird book and some binoculars, so thank you. So let's talk Birthday Bestsellers TBR. It was not a resounding success, but not a total failure. So the first book I tried was Mary Higgins Clark, All Around the Town, which was number 2 bestseller on May the 3rd on the New York Times list and was on the Publishers Weekly list, and I gave up after about 10 pages. It was just very, very 90s in like tone and style, and the subject matter just wasn't gripping me. It was quite slow and boring compared to like, I guess, modern thrillers that I'm used to, and I just wasn't feeling it. I thought I'll see whether it's just this book, so I tried another Mary Higgins Clark, which was also out in 1992, which is The Shadow of Your Smile, and same thing, just not feeling it. So, first 2 I tried, complete DNFs after very few pages, but then I tried The Pelican Brief by John Grisham. So this was the bestseller on May the 3rd, the year I was born, 9 weeks consecutive then, 12 weeks total through the year, so it was like the biggest bestseller of the year, and so it had an interesting enough concept, and it started off okay, and there were some interesting parallels with kind of like the Supreme Court setup now and some of the issues that were coming up with Supreme Court justices now and in this novel, but it just was really slow. It felt like it took forever, and I was halfway through and I still didn't know why it was called The Pelican Brief. You know, it was starting to get into all the intrigue with this brief that had been written, but still no hints as to like what the brief was actually about. There was all of the trouble that it was causing and the kind of the main character having to go on the run, but nothing giving me any idea why it was actually called The Pelican Brief, and I started to realise I wasn't really up for another 2 or 3 days of slogging through this to find out. So I sacked it off and I decided that I did want to find out what happened, not enough for another 2 days, but 2 hours, so I watched the film. So I at least got to find out why it was called The Pelican Brief. I know that the film takes some liberties and switches some things around. The journalist character takes on more importance in the film than I think he does in the novel, but I don't know because nothing had really started happening with him in the novel, which was another reason I was just like, I'm bored. If you hear any weird knocking noises, it's because my cat is currently on my wheelie spinny office chair and he keeps accidentally spinning himself around, but the chair can't go anywhere because it's on the desk, so that's what's happening. Film was enjoyable enough, but what the hell is Julia Roberts' age? I don't understand. She was apparently 25 when she filmed The Pelican Brief, which is about the same age as the character, but she almost looked older, but then she also doesn't seem to have aged since then. Is she one of these Keanu Reeves vampires? I think she is. So, after the meh that was Pelican Brief, I moved on to Stephen King's Gerald's Game. This was the second biggest bestseller of the year I was born. I think it was 9 weeks consecutive from July to September, something like that. And other than knowing that it was a sex game gone wrong, I didn't really know anything about it, and it was very, very dark. Essentially, I think a spoiler-free premise of it is, yes, there's a sort of sex game gone wrong and a woman ends up handcuffed to a bed and is there on her own. But then it goes into her head, into her history. It's quite triggering in lots of ways, lots of things about kind of abuse and consent and her relationship to her husband and her father and all these other sort of weird things going on. You can tell I'm saying you can tell, I've only read a few Stephen King books, but I'm starting to enjoy his work, but you can tell it's quite an early Stephen King. I think it could have done with like a tighter edit. Some bits were kind of repeated. It seemed to take a little bit longer to get going than maybe would have been ideal. But this notion of something kind of quite spooky and scary and quite horrible going on in the foreground, and all this kind of mental anguish going on in the background, was really interestingly done. Also, on the note of it feeling like an early Stephen King, I would say the last third of the novel, probably a bit less than that, it felt like there was another idea that Stephen King wanted to weave into this narrative, but he couldn't quite figure out how to weave it in, and there was sort of like mentions of it, and you were like, okay, is this real or is this not? And then it was kind of tacked on at the end, and it was like, oh, okay. So it was a bit odd. It kind of felt like there was two separate books going on there, and maybe, I don't know, if I read more Stephen King, maybe that kind of ending character and notion on what was going on will pop up again, but it didn't kind of gel as an overall cohesive narrative quite as well as I would have liked. It kind of felt like two books and pulled me out of the immersion for a little bit. So it was quite heavy going in terms of subject matter and content, and it had the single most grim, gruesome, horrific passage I have ever read in any book, is when she's getting herself out of her handcuffs, and my wrists still itch thinking about it, and I was genuinely reading it going, and my mum was like, put the book down. So he does evocative very well, but it was gross. So after I read Gerald's Game, I thought, okay, maybe I'll go for Dolores Claiborne, another Stephen King. But you know what? All I could really find out about Dolores Claiborne is that it was another quite heavy-going, potentially quite triggering, very dark. And I thought, I've just come off the back of Gerald's Game, which was very grim. I've read a couple of boring books before that I didn't finish. I fancy something kind of light rather than depressing. So I put Dolores Claiborne to one side, and I picked up Terry McMillan's Waiting to Exhale. You will remember, possibly from the TBR video, that this is the book that kind of sparked this whole idea many moons ago. So I was really looking forward to it, and I was hoping, again, particularly because I wanted something lighter, I was hoping I was really going to enjoy it, but I ended up DNFing this one quite quickly as well. So firstly, again, it was very 90s in terms of tone and style, and was beginning to feel very 90s in terms of content as well, but I think I could have pushed past that. You know, I read books that aren't necessarily particularly, what's the word I'm looking for? Where's it gone? Contemporary, there we go. I read books that aren't immediately contemporary. I've read older books before, and you know, you read very, very old books and things like that, but there's something weird about, I guess, being in the 2020s and reading something from the 1990s that it's almost like it's not far enough away for it to be sort of quaint and revisiting it. It's close enough that it's kind of like, oh, this is just a bit boring now. But as I say, the 90s element I could have pushed through if it wasn't for the fact that the kind of content of it was very focused on like finding a man, and I was like, okay, not really here for that. And then when it started going into sort of hints of like midlife crisis, what am I doing with my life, I was like, you know what, I've got enough of that going on in my own head, thank you very much. Don't need to read a 500-page novel about it. And then I thought, you know what, okay, I've read some quite heavy ones, I wanted something light, let's try Terry Pratchett's Small Gods. And you know what, I couldn't even start reading it, I just wasn't in the mood. I started getting in a little bit of a reading funk. Possibly off the back of reading these dark books, possibly just where my hormones and emotions and everything were at the time, but I couldn't even start it. I ended up reading loads of different blurbs and reviews of it to try and decide if I wanted to bother reading it, and just didn't. And then I was trying to decide which of the other ones I wanted to read. Do I want to read one of the sort of prize winners from that year? Do I maybe go for some Omeros? Do I go for a reread of The English Patient? And then I got distracted by Lee Bloody Bardugo, didn't I? Everyone was talking about Shadow and Bone TV series. I'd been toying with reading the novels for a while, so I thought, okay, sod it. Let's just sack off the Birthday Bestsellers TBR. It was kind of like getting too close to my birthday to be bothered to start another one. I just wasn't feeling any of them on the TBR at that time, so I moved on to the Grishaverse. But I will talk about that more general in my April wrap-up. So, as I say, not a resounding success. Quite a few DNFs. Pretty much all DNFs. I finished one book. Yeah, finished one book. And in some ways, it was a book I kind of wish I hadn't read, because it was just so dark and gross and, oh, my wrist's itching again. If I say the word degloving... Now, some of the other books that were on the TBR, they're not going to be ones that I'm ruling out forever. I'm trying to think how to word this, but it ended up being a really interesting look at kind of what was popular at the time, and, you know, was obviously then the bestsellers, and then looking at the books that won prizes in that year, and the author names that won prizes are more... I don't really know how to put this, but you've got Michael Ondaatje's The English Patient, which is still studied. still read, or usually always on one of the kind of like biggest bestseller tables in bookshops. You've got a Rose Tremaine. Okay, maybe Sacred Country isn't one that you would think of now, but Rose Tremaine is a big enough name that you know her work. Jane Smiley, another one, maybe 1,000 Acres, not the most popular work, but Jane Smiley is known. Tim Winton's Cloud Street, that's another one that's usually always on one of those tables in the bookshop. I know it always was when I was working in one. And then the other ones that were on that TBR, Terry Pratchett, that's a name we all know and love. Paulo Coelho, again, not particularly The Valkyries as popular, but everybody has heard of The Alchemist pretty much. Ian Banks' The Crow Road, another one that's quite popular that was turned into a film that's often on these tables, or at least is stacked face out on the bookshelves in a bookshop. Leviathan, Paul Auster, another big name. And John Grisham was a big name at the time and still continues to be a big name. He's still, you know, those books are still coming out. I remember, you know, they were always quite a popular one that was still coming out when I was working in the bookshop. But it's just quite interesting how books that were popular then, I'm thinking more, I guess, the Mary Higgins Clark and the Terry Macmillans, that haven't stood the test of time, as it were. And is it an unconscious thing that because these books have won prizes, that their names carry more weight and the authors carry on it? I don't know. I feel like I haven't got my brain properly engaged to talk about it, but just it kind of ended up being an interesting look at popularity at the time and longevity from prize winners. Obviously someone like Stephen King and Terry Pratchett, they're kind of the outliers because they're more genre specific, I guess. Again, I'm not opening that whole can of worms, but yeah, I don't know, there's something in that, I don't know. And off the back of that, any of the books that are on my TBR that I didn't read that I'm more bothered to read are the prize-winning ones. Maybe that says more about me than the books themselves. But I'm not likely to go back to John Grisham. I'm not likely to look out another Terry Macmillan. I'm definitely not going to bother with another Mary Higgins Clark. And I know, particularly Grisham and Higgins Clark, they were big names at the time. I don't know, but the Paulo Coelho, the Ian Banks, the Paul Auster, they're ones I'm going to read at some point because they sounded interesting enough and I was intrigued by them. The Tim Winton, as I say, in the TBR video, not ruled him out off the back of one I read, which I've already forgotten, but it had something to do with winter because it was the book Hibernation. Not ruled it out, but it's never particularly grabbed me. So, an interesting experiment, and if not a particularly fulfilling or satiating way to spend the week or so before my birthday, it was worth doing. I had fun, if fun's the right word. Degloving. Oh. So have a little chat with me in the comments below. Are you going to do something similar? Have you already done something similar off the back of the TBR, and what results have you found? I don't know why I'm talking about it like it's a science experiment, but it kind of is a bit of an experiment. Have you had a look at the prize winners the year you were born, and how far have those perhaps stood the test of time over the more popularly consumed ones? That wasn't a word. So I'm going to go and make another cup of coffee because, as per usual, the one I made for filming of this video has gone stone cold. Why did I waste one of my good coffee pods on a coffee for filming a video when I know I never drink them? Damn it. And I will see you next time for my April wrap-up and haul. Thank you very much. Goodbye.